Hey, welcome folks to today's episode of The Law of Self-Defense. It's good to be back. Make yourselves comfortable. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Thank you. That's not necessary. I appreciate it, though. Thank you very much. I took the last couple days off to do a little impromptu motorcycle trip down to Taos, New Mexico from my own home near Denver. We were down to Taos one day, back the next day, through the mountains, and it was great. A little colder than I would have liked in the mornings. Up in the mountains, it still was well below freezing, but other than that, it was a great couple days away. Of course, this past Saturday, we did our full-day Law of Self-Defense Advanced course. So that's over, folks. That was the only one scheduled for 2023. Hopefully you made it. If you didn't, what can I tell you? You missed the opportunity. But now it is Tuesday, April 18th, and I am back in the office. And of course, while I was attempting to relax on my motorcycle trip, the world was burning down over another example of racial arson being promulgated by attorney Benjamin Crump and attorney Lee Merritt. And that's what we'll be talking about today. The shooting of Ralph Yarry by 84-year-old homeowner Andrew Lester. Now, if you heard in the description, of course, I set out what the defense narrative is going to be in this case. And in fact, I'll share that with all of you now. Of course, you can read it at your leisure. But in the late night hours of last Thursday, April 13th, an 84-year-old homeowner who lives by himself was awoken from his bed at 10 p.m. at night by someone banging on his front door. He armed himself with a .32 caliber pistol, opened up his front door to respond to the person outside. And before him stood an unknown 6-foot-tall male trespassing in violation of several no trespassing signs on the property and apparently attempting to force entry through the homeowner's locked storm door. That's an apparent forcible home invasion. The homeowner shot at the attempted intruder twice, and the intruder fled. And then the homeowner promptly called 911 to report the event and was completely cooperative with police and authorities when they arrived, including letting them completely search his home and so forth. For this 84-year-old homeowner, Andrew Lester, has been immediately targeted for racial arson by Benjamin Crump, Lee Merritt, others of his ilk. A full-blown propaganda campaign is raging across Twitter and the news media, demonizing Lester for purportedly having shot 16-year-old Ralph Yarry simply for the crime of having rung Lester's doorbell. Within a day, Lester was charged by Prosecutor Zachary Thompson with the life felony of first-degree assault, as well as the 15-year felony of armed criminal action. Notably, Prosecutor Thompson informed the public in announcing these charges that, quote, "It's been my goal from the very beginning to get justice for the child involved in this case." No mention was made of any interest in justice for 84-year-old homeowner Andrew Lester, facing an apparent home invader at 10 p.m. at night. That's where we are so far. And of course, what's happening on, if you spend any time on Twitter or social media, and we'll go through a number of news media reports in this event, all you're hearing is stuff like this. What happened to the neat stuff I wanted to pull up? All you're hearing are the propaganda representations of what happened here, like this. Justin Timberlake, a musician, I'm told, writes, Ralph Yarry, is it Yarry or Yarl? I thought it was Yarry. if I'm getting that wrong. Jarl. My mistake. My mistake. Apologies for getting that wrong. Justin Timberlake. Ralph Jarl accidentally rang the door of the wrong house while trying to pick up his siblings. For this, a man shot him in the head. That's why we're supposed to believe that Andrew Lester shot Ralph Jarl in the head, because Ralph Jarl rang the doorbell of his home. That's what we're supposed to believe. Then shot him a second time as he was on the ground, as if that's undisputed fact. 4.2 million views of this propagandistic representation of what happened. Absolutely no effort to be even-handed, just jumping on the Benjamin Crump bandwagon. How is anybody in America supposed to get justice when in an instant over 4 million people can be thoroughly propagandized? And this is one tweet of thousands cascading across Twitter. And of course, if you read the news media, they simply follow the propaganda like this in the usual manner. So this is what we'll be talking about today. Before we do, I should mention that today's show is sponsored by none other than American Law Courses. American Law Courses, these are the law school level courses that we've set up for people who are interested in a law school education, law school level education without the unbelievable cost and time commitment of law school, and without any of the political toxicity of law school. Learn criminal law, evidence, property, constitutional law, and much more at a law school level by expert instructors at AmericanLawCourses.com. And this summer, I'm very proud to announce we're doing our first course in constitutional law as part of the summer semester. You can learn more about all this by pointing your browser to AmericanLawCourses.com. So obviously, nobody commenting on this event, the shooting of Ralph Jarl by Andrew Lester, was there. I wasn't there. Justin Timberlake wasn't there. Benjamin Crump wasn't there. The prosecutor wasn't there. So none of us has personal knowledge of what happened, as always in these cases. All we can do is look at the evidence and attempt to come to reasonable inferences from the evidence. And there is evidence to suggest that Andrew Lester did not shoot Ralph Jarl simply because Ralph was at the wrong house or rang his doorbell or knocked on his door. That Andrew Lester had substantively better reasons for firing 2 shots at Ralph Jarl, including a reasonably possessed belief that the 84-year-old's home was about to be forcibly entered and subject to a home invasion at 10 p.m. at night while he was there alone because he lived alone. I expect that to be the defense narrative in this case, but you won't hear a word of that from the news media or social media. You'll find bits and pieces in the news media because they can't help but report it. They probably don't know that they're reporting things that are harmful to the Benjamin Crump narrative of shot for ringing a doorbell. And I've gone through some of the news reports. We'll look at 4 or 5 of them, and I've highlighted the relevant portions that support the defense narrative, but which the news media themselves would never put together in a cohesive manner, so you could see the other side. So before I dive in, sure the will be streaming. There's YouTube's working right. The Law Self-Defense dashboard is working right. See if I got Rumble working this time. Come on, Rumble. All right. And Twitter. Oh, come on. Oh, there we go. All right. Pin that to the top. And as always, folks, if you'd like to make comments or ask questions that I will address personally, I'm happy to do that over the course of the show. But if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble and you want to submit your questions there, they need to be in the form of super chats or Rumble rants, $5 minimum. Super chat or Rumble rant, or they just get lost in the chat. Alternatively, you could, if you're watching this as a Law of Self-Defense member on the Law of Self-Defense dashboard, you could become a Law of Self-Defense member if you're not one. But if you're on the Law of Self-Defense member dashboard, which you need to log in for, you can ask as many questions as you want for free, not $5 a pop. Becoming a Law of Self-Defense member is easy, folks. You can do it right there, that URL on the screen, lawofselfdefense.com/join. It's less than $10 a month, about 30 cents a day, to ask as many questions as you want every day for free. Or you can do $5 YouTube super chats and Rumble rants. It's up to you. But that's the way that works here. Become a Law of Self-Defense member right now. Save yourself a ton of money at lawofselfdefense.com/join. All right, so let's take a look at some of these. Well, before we jump into the news articles, why don't we do this? Why don't we take a look at the actual relevant law here, the Missouri law, on when you can use deadly force in defense of your home. How about that? Let's take a look at that. And yes, folks, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're not already subscribed, you need to do that to comment there anyway. Hit the thumbs like up button. Leave a comment, even if it's only your city and state. And the same for Rumble. Whatever the equivalents for Rumble are, subscribe, hit the thumbs up, and leave a comment, even if it's only your city and state. That helps fool the algorithm into sharing our Law of Self-Defense content more broadly. So let's do something that the media would never do, and that is look at actual law. So this happened in Missouri. So we look at the relevant Missouri statute. Now, use of force law can be thought of as falling into a couple of distinct categories. There's defense of persons and defense of property. And each of those can really be thought of as falling into two buckets. So defense of persons could be self-defense or defense of others. Defense of property could be defense of highly defensible property, like your home, and defense of personal property, items, your cell phone, your unoccupied car, just stuff. And some states do have a separate statute for each of those four general buckets of use of force law: defense of yourself, defense of others, defense of home, defense of personal property. But unfortunately, and that would be the cleanest way and most transparent way to structure, for a state to structure its use of force law statutes. But unfortunately, a lot of states don't do that. We don't necessarily send our best and brightest to the legislature. So sometimes they combine those different buckets into single statutes. And we have a bit of that here in this Missouri law, 563.031. So it's entitled Use of Force in Defense of Persons, and it does cover use of force in defense of persons, both deadly force and non-deadly force, with different conditions for each. But it also incorporates, although it doesn't note this in the title, use of force in defense of highly defensible property like a home. And that's what we will be looking at here. So a very common structure, use of force in defense of property. A person may use physical force. Now, it doesn't say deadly physical force, so this implicitly means non-deadly force. These are the conditions that must be met before any force can be used, and then additional conditions are added before deadly force can be used. We're focusing here really on a apparent defense of home scenario, which also, of course, incorporates intrinsically defense of self. You're the person inside your home. But there are preferential conditions established for when you're defending your home that relieves you of some of the elements that must otherwise be met when you're defending yourself. So when you're defending yourself, we have the 5 elements of self-defense. And if you look through the Missouri statute, and I'll put a link to this statute in the description, and perhaps pin it in the first comment, so it's easy for you folks to find if you'd like to refer to it afterwards. It's Missouri Statute 563.031. And if you scroll through, you'll find all the elements, the 5 elements of self-defense that you need to justify the use of force, non-deadly force in defense of persons, And then we have the additional condition for the use of deadly force in defense of person. And for the 5 elements purposes, for that element of proportionality, you have to meet all the conditions for non-deadly force. And then you also have to reasonably believe that deadly defensive force is necessary to protect yourself or another against death, serious physical injury, or any forcible felony. So you can't escalate to deadly force in defense of yourself unless you're facing a deadly force threat. A deadly force threat meaning death, serious bodily injury, forcible felony. That's if you're just defending yourself, absent the context of defending your castle, defending your home. But there exists an alternative path to justify the use of deadly force upon another person if you are defending your castle. And what is that under Missouri law? Well, it's the very same statute, just the next paragraph. So we have here section 2, which is the deadly force section. A person shall not use deadly force upon another unless, oh, look at this. Such force is used against a person who unlawfully enters, remains after unlawfully entering, or attempts to unlawfully enter a dwelling, residence, or vehicle lawfully occupied by the defender. Now, importantly, folks, what controls here is not the absolute truth of what was happening. It's actually irrelevant if Ralph Yarl was actually attempting to breach Andrew Lester's home. What controls from a legal, because the threat you're defending yourself does not have to be actual, and you're not required to make perfect decisions in self-defense. You're only required to make reasonable decisions in self-defense. And if you reasonably perceive an apparent attempt to forcibly enter your home, that triggers this justification for the use of deadly defensive force. And if it later turns out that the person you thought was an unlawful intruder wasn't, but you reasonably perceived them as they were, that's a lawful use of deadly force in defense of your dwelling under Missouri law, right here. So the question is there a view of the evidence here that would support a reasonable perception by Andrew Lester that what he was facing across his threshold was someone attempting to forcibly enter his dwelling? Because if the evidence supports that reasonable perception, this is a lawful use of deadly defensive force by Andrew Lester. And by the way, once Andrew Lester raises that defense, he doesn't have to prove it's more likely than not. He doesn't have to prove anything. The state would have to disprove beyond a reasonable doubt that Andrew Lester had a reasonable perception that he was defending himself against someone trying to force entry into his dwelling. So we should look and see if there is evidence, even in the media reports. You won't see it on Twitter, of course, because Twitter is nothing but propaganda once a Benjamin Crump and a Lee Merritt are involved. But we should look at the media reports and see if we can find evidence that would support a reasonable perception by Andrew Lester in his circumstances, given his age, given his situation, given the time of night, given the disparity in age, fitness, strength between himself and the person he sees apparently trying to forcibly enter his home. From the evidence, that's what the state, the prosecutor here, who's interested in justice for Ralph Yarl, but never mentions justice for 84-year-old homeowner, law-abiding citizen, Andrew Lester, sitting in his home, in bed, 10 p.m. at night, when Ralph Yarl came to him, came to his house, walked past the no trespassing signs, banged on the door. There's all evidence of all of this, folks. So let's take a look at some of the news stories. And these aren't in any particular order, but I just want to kind of check off the boxes of the evidence I see in what are obviously biased news reports that nevertheless support Andrew Lester's narrative of reasonably perceiving an effort by Ralph Yarl to forcibly enter his dwelling, triggering the Missouri justification for the use of deadly defensive force. So this one is headlined, "A Racial Component." Guess how much evidence there is to suggest there's any kind of racial motive on the part of Andrew Lester in shooting Ralph Yarl? You want to guess? Think about the other high-profile cases that Benjamin Crump has been involved in, where he spewed nothing but lies intended to earn him millions while setting the nation ablaze with racial animus. George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was killed for the crime of having Skittles and iced tea. Remember that one? All the photos of Trayvon Martin propagated by the media as a cute 13-year-old, not the well-muscled 17-year-old that was beating Zimmerman's head into a sidewalk. The eyewitness testimony of Trayvon Martin atop a George Zimmerman on his back, giving him the ground and pound treatment, MMA style. We don't hear any of that from Benjamin Crump. We just hear the allegations of racial bias. There was zero evidence that George Zimmerman had a racist bone in his body. In fact, everything about his life would suggest he's got negative racism. The FBI sent teams of agents to his apartment complex, interviewing everybody, trying to find anybody who could say they perceived racial animus in George Zimmerman. And his neighbors only had glowing things to say about George Zimmerman, including his black neighbors. George Zimmerman had actually led a protest against the local police department when he thought they unfairly beat a black suspect, a friend of his, in the community. But you'd never know that from media reports or from Benjamin Crump, because Benjamin Crump doesn't tell the truth about these cases. That's not in his interest. What about Michael Brown? Hands up, don't shoot. Remember that lie? That Michael Brown had his hands up in surrender when Officer Darren Wilson shot him, killed him. When all the credible evidence presented to the grand jury was that Michael Brown had already fought Officer Wilson for control of his gun, reaching into the officer's car to do that, and then was charging Wilson. The 300-pound gentle giant was charging a police officer half his weight with his arms outstretched in attack when Darren Wilson was compelled to shoot him. But you'll never hear that from Benjamin Crump, because Benjamin Crump doesn't tell the truth about these stories, because it's not in his interest. He doesn't make millions of dollars in settlements if he tells the truth about these cases. We hear these lies all the time. Freddie Gray, a street corner drug dealer, picked up by the police at the request of State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby to do a sweep of that open-air drug market. Freddie Gray's run down, foot chased by the police. He's discovered to have an unlawful knife. He's arrested on that charge. He's put in a police van, handcuffed. And when the van gets to his destination, Freddie Gray has a broken neck. And State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby charged 6 police officers with crimes as serious as murder, brought them all to trial, or as many as she could before the charges were ultimately dismissed against all of them, because everyone actually that went to trial was either a mistrial or an acquittal at bench trials with a black judge. And there was never any evidence that any of those officers used any unlawful force on Freddie Gray. Guys like Benjamin Crump would talk about the fact that, Freddie Gray was given a rough ride. That's what broke his neck. Zero evidence of that presented at trial. None. It's all lies. These cases are always a veneer of lies over nothing. And I don't know if that's the case here, because I wasn't there. I haven't heard both sides of the legal arguments and seen both sides of the evidence. But I can tell you, I know the reputation and the pattern of conduct of guys like Benjamin Crump in these cases, and it's not trustworthy. It's not honest. It's deceptive. It's propagandistic. And it serves primarily to funnel millions of dollars in settlement to Benjamin Crump. So when we look at the new media reports, what do we see here that might actually support a narrative of innocence on the part of Andrew Lester? A narrative that he reasonably perceived that he was defending his home against a young, strong, male apparent home invader. So this article, a racial component. Court documents detail charges against Andrew Lester, man accused of shooting teenager Ralph Yarl. I don't know why they have to say he was accused. He concedes that he shot Ralph Yarl. What do we see here? Oh, and I'm not going to read the whole things because they're too long. I'm going to read the highlighted components. And again, I'll put links to these in the description so you can read the entirety for yourselves. I don't feel like I need to read the parts that are consistent with the propaganda because the propaganda, all of social media is awash with the propaganda. You won't be able to avoid that. I want to focus here on the other side of the argument. In his announcing his decision to file charges, Clay County Prosecutor Zachary Thompson said there was a racial component to the case. There is literally zero evidence that Andrew Lester had any racial motive in his shooting of Ralph Yarl. None. The only possible racial component would be the happenstance that Andrew Lester is white and Ralph Yarl is black. That's it. And by the way, by all reports, the probable cause statement, which we've only got glimpses of because they've not released it, at least I can't find it. The probable cause statement, by all reports, makes no mention of any racial component, and there's been no hate crime charged here, which there would have been if there was a racial component. So this is just Prosecutor Zachary Thompson feeding fuel into the racial arson set by Benjamin Crump. There's zero basis to such a statement. In fact, Thompson himself says to the media that, well, actually, the probable cause statement doesn't include anything about race. No racial motive, no racial bias, no racial animus on the part of Andrew Lester. Lester provided written consent to search his residence. He called 911 immediately after the shooting. He's not trying to hide anything. In fact, he was looking for the protection of the police. Help. I had to shoot someone at my home. Please come. What, you'd like to search? Yes, of course. I'll sign the document. Go ahead, search. You don't need a warrant. I give you my permission. Fully cooperative with the authorities. A witness says they thought it was odd for their elderly neighbor to have a visitor this late at night. Yeah, darn it. I've been reading the parts, but I forgot to pull it up. It's fine. A witness thought it was odd for their elderly neighbor to have a visitor this late at night. Yeah, that would be odd, wouldn't it? I mean, and wouldn't it be odd to Andrew Lester? Maybe that's why he went to his door at 10 p.m., knowing he lives alone in the home with a pistol in his hand, because it was unusual, especially given the no trespassing signs that someone would have had to walk past to get to his front door, knowing they were not present by license, knowing they were trespassing by doing that, having been put on notice. Would that contribute to Andrew Lester's reasonable perception that he was facing a potential threat? You don't know. And someone knocks on your door or rings your bell, you go to the door. That's what those things are for, right? That's what a doorbell is for, to alert you to come to the door. But you don't have to go to the door defenseless. You can go to the door in your own home with a pistol in your hand if you want. Some would say it's prudent under these circumstances. Continuing, the probable cause statement said Lester said he picked up his gun before responding to the door. Lester told authorities he believed someone was attempting to break into his house. Why would he think that? Why would he think that? Would he think that just because the doorbell was rung, or might it be because someone was banging on his door, forcibly? Banging large enough, by the way, that his neighbor at 10 p.m. at night heard the banging from inside his own home. That's how loud it was. Lester said he shot twice within seconds of opening the door and no words were exchanged. Is it required that you exchange words with someone apparently trying to break into your home before you can defend that home? No, there is no such requirement. Andrew Lester said it was the last thing, 84-year-old Andrew Lester said it was the last thing he wanted to do, but was scared to death because of Yarl's size and his age, not because of his race. So much for the racial component. You think the media would have included race if Lester had mentioned race? You're damn right. And I don't know why they use but here. Isn't the appropriate conjunction and? 84-year-old Lester said it was the last thing he wanted to do, and he was scared to death because of Jarl's size and his age. The probable cause states Lester believes he was protecting himself, but later expressed consent for the victim. Again, wouldn't the proper conjunction there be and? Why can't both those things be true? They phrase it like they're inconsistent with each other. How about the probable cause statement states Lester believes he was protecting himself and later expressed concern for the victim. That's a good thing. It's necessary to defend yourself, but that doesn't mean you have to wish the other person dies. You neutralize the threat, and then I would suggest it's in your own interest if they don't die. And here Lester's expressing concern for the person against whom he felt compelled to use deadly force in defense of his home against an apparent forcible entry. Next news story. This one titled, see if I can make this bigger. Ralph Yarl shooting. Prosecutors charge white homeowner Andrew Lester, 84, with attacking black teenager. It's always interesting to me that they lowercase white, but they uppercase black. Someday I'd like to know what the rationale for that is. I mean, I couldn't care less if they upper or lowercase people's race, but why would you do it differently for different races? Seems weird. Here we go. In a press conference on Monday, County Prosecutor Zachary Thompson said his office had charged a man named Andrew Lester with first-degree assault, carrying a maximum sentence of life in prison. Life in prison, a life felony. Of course, he's 84 years old. I mean, Andrew Lester, realistically speaking, now that this prosecutor has decided to bring charges against him, is going to spend likely the rest of his life, the brief remainder of his life, as a criminal defendant in a life sentence case. Because he defended himself against an apparent home invader, which Missouri law allows. The homeowner, and if that's not enough, the homeowner has also been charged with armed criminal action, punishable by between 3 and 15 years in prison. Think Andrew Lester has 15 years left in him at 84? Mr. Thompson, the prosecutor, said that 84-year-old Andrew Lester had shot Ralph, just first name basis, I guess, had shot Ralph Yarl through a glass door with a .32 caliber revolver without the 16-year-old ever crossing the threshold of his home, and that there was a racial component to the case. Well, there's no evidence of any racial motive, animus, malice on the part of Andrew Lester, as we've already discussed, and his whole without the 16-year-old ever crossing the threshold of his home. Why would that matter? Because Missouri law doesn't require that. Remember, the Missouri statute simply says you can use deadly force against a person who attempts to unlawfully enter a dwelling. There's no requirement that they cross the threshold. The attempt, the apparent attempt, it need not be an actual attempt. A reasonably perceived attempt is sufficient to allow for the use of deadly defensive force in defense of your home under Missouri law. No requirement. And here's the prosecutor again. It's been my goal from the very beginning to get justice for the child involved in the case. You know who's also entitled to justice? Homeowner, 85-year-old Andrew Lester is entitled to justice under Missouri law, given that Missouri's use of force law allows for the use of a person in their dwelling to use deadly defensive force against someone apparently attempting to unlawfully enter. Is there evidence of an apparent attempt to unlawfully enter? There is. Andrew Lester himself says that Andrew Yarl was attempting to force open the storm door in his home, the locked storm door in his home. And Lester's neighbor, who came and provided aid to Ralph Yarl and appears in his statements to the media to be completely sympathetic to Ralph Yarl. He said that he became alarmed, aware of the ruckus next door, when he heard from his own home banging on Andrew Lester's door. That's how loud the banging was. Lee Merritt is an attorney who works often with Benjamin Crump. They're of the same ilk. Said that Ralph had rung the doorbell just before 10 p.m., believing he was on the similarly named street where his twin brothers live. Where his twin brothers live? Ralph Yarl doesn't know where his twin brothers live? How could he be at the wrong house? But it doesn't matter, because what matters here is not Ralph Yarl's state of mind. Let's presume that Ralph Yarl is the most innocent 16-year-old in the world. I'm more than willing to assume that. I don't have any reason to believe otherwise. It doesn't matter. Legally, it doesn't matter in terms of whether or not Andrew Lester's use of force was lawful or unlawful. All that matters is not Ralph Yarl's state of mind, but Andrew Lester's state of mind, and whether or not his perception, his reasonable perception of Ralph Yarl's conduct was that of a person attempting to forcibly enter his dwelling. That's all the Missouri statute requires. It's got nothing to do with what Ralph Yarl was thinking, or his intent, or his desires, or his aspirations, or where his brothers lived, or anything else. Mr. Merritt, so again, you can't believe what Merritt says any more than you can believe what Crump says. Mr. Merritt said the homeowner took a long time to appear because he was in bed. Took a long time to appear before telling Ralph, don't come back around here, and immediately shooting him without provocation. Well, you can't believe Merritt. And that's not the story Ralph Yarl says anyway. Ralph Yarl says he was shot first. And then he says that Lester told him not to come back. Is it unreasonable to tell someone you sufficiently perceived as a home invader that you shot them twice? Is it unreasonable to tell that person, don't come back to my house? Mr. Thompson gave a different account. This would be the prosecutor. Gave a different, saying that the probable cause statement does not indicate any words were exchanged, and that whether Ralph rang the doorbell may be in dispute. Right, folks. None of us knows with any absolute certainty what happened, especially at this early stage. Prudent people would be waiting for the evidence to develop before they send a mob of angry people to deface Andrew Lester's home with graffiti, with eggs, a threatening mob outside the home of an 84-year-old who lives alone, who's been found guilty of absolutely nothing, who has a rational legal defense for his conduct. So we don't even know. Even the prosecutor is not willing to say that Ralph Yarl rang the doorbell. We know he banged on the door because the neighbor, who has no reason to lie, said he heard it from inside his own house. And for those who are wondering, Ralph Yarl he's not dead. He was released from the hospital within a couple of days. He's at home now. 32 caliber pistol. Not the most powerful self-defense firearm you might have your hands on. Next news story. Wait a minute. Is this the same one I did already? Let's see. Yes, I did that one already. Let me do this next one. Whoops. Headline, 84-year-old man charged in front door shooting of black teen Ralph Yarl. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump talks about the shooting of Ralph Yarl. Prosecuting attorney Zachary Thompson said at a news conference there was a racial component Thursday. Not in the probable cause statement, and not detailed in any way by Prosecutor Thompson. No evidence of racial animus, malice, ill will on the part of Andrew Lester. But nevertheless, he feels free to say to feed fire into the Benjamin Crump racial arson by saying there was a racial component that night when Andrew Lester shot 16-year-old Ralph Yarl, who was recovering at home after being released from the hospital. But nothing in the charging documents says the shooting was racially motivated, according to the prosecutor. The shooting outraged many in Kansas City and across the country, of course, because that's the intent of this racial arson propaganda that Benjamin Crump engages in. Civic and political leaders, including President Joe Biden. You think President Joe Biden has any personal knowledge of what happened here? Or is this just another Barack Obama, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon Martin? Including President Joe Biden, demanded justice. Some, including lawyers for Yarl, that would be Benjamin Crump and Lee Merritt, pressed the racial dimension of the case. What racial dimension? The happenstance that the homeowner was white and the person apparently attempting to force entry into the home was black? Nobody's more racist than people who profit from racism, folks, like Benjamin Crump and Lee Merritt. Here we have some more of that ilk. Reverend Vernon Howard, president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Greater Kansas City, called the shooting a heinous and hate-filled crime. There's no evidence of malice, hate on the part of Andrew Lester. The only evidence to his state of mind is that he was in fear for his life. Vice President Kamala Harris, well, if you can't trust what Kamala has to say, what can you trust? Am I right, fellas? Vice President Kamala Harris wrote on Twitter that, quote, no child should ever live in fear of being shot for ringing the wrong doorbell, close quote. Even the prosecutor is not willing to say that Ralph Yarl rang the doorbell. And that's not why he was shot. How do we know? Because the shooter told us. You think the shooter called 911 and said, yeah, somebody came and rang my doorbell, so I shot him? This is propaganda because it's absent critical perception of the evidence, looking at the evidence from both sides. That's why it's propaganda. It's the one-sided narrative. The civil rights attorneys for Yarl's family, Ben Crump and Lee Merritt, said in a statement that Biden called Yarl's family and offered prayers for Ralph's health and for justice. Isn't Biden the guy that said, hey, if you're in your home and someone's threatening you, you fire a shotgun? Do I remember that? 2 barrels in the air. Gun violence against unarmed black individuals must stop. Our children should feel safe, not as though they're being hunted. How about our 84-year-old homeowners living alone at night in bed? Should they have a privilege to feel safe under those circumstances? Does the Missouri use of deadly force in defense of your dwelling require that the person you're defending against be armed? Or is it enough that they're unlawfully attempting to gain entry? What's it say? What's that section of the statute say? Oh, here it is. That you're using deadly force against a person who is attempting to unlawfully enter a dwelling. It's not required that they be armed. It's not actually required that they, in the moment, be threatening deadly force at all. The unlawful entering of the dwelling stands in for the requirement of a deadly force threat. It's presumed if someone's apparently attempting to force entry into your dwelling that they're doing it for unlawful purposes, intending to cause death or serious bodily injury to the people inside the home. There's no explanation consistent with innocence why some stranger walks past all the no trespassing signs, bangs on the door loud enough for the neighbors to hear, grabs at the handle of the locked storm door, shaking it vigorously enough that it appears they're attempting to force it open. What's the innocent explanation for all that? And then we have, of course, the usual bad law from the media. Missouri is among roughly 30 states with stand your ground laws, 39 states, which allow for the use of deadly force in self-defense. Does stand your ground mean that that's what allows for deadly force in self-defense? Do you think that the 11 duty to retreat states, the 11 states that are not stand your ground, you think they don't allow for the use of deadly force in self-defense? Folks, when I say journalists are among the dumbest class of people I've ever met, ever have to deal with, this is why. Obviously, every state has a provision for the use of deadly force in self-defense, and it's not dependent on them being a stand your ground state, because the non-stand your ground states also allow for the use of deadly force in self-defense if the appropriate conditions have been met. But the prosecutor determined the shooting was not in self-defense. Well, the prosecutors decided to bring charges for political reasons. Who knows? He's looking out for justice for Ralph Yarl. Apparently no interest in justice for Andrew Lester. But of course, self-defense would be one legal defense here, but defense of dwelling would be the other. And I expect that to be the one the defense will focus on because it's the most favorable to Andrew Lester. Much less of a burden on Andrew Lester to argue defense of dwelling. I'm sure he'll also argue self-defense as well. Andrew Lester, 84-year-old Andrew Lester, told police that he lives alone, had just gone to bed when he heard his doorbell, according to the probable cause statement. He said he picked up his gun and went to the door, where he saw a black male pulling on the exterior storm door handle. Why would you do that on a house that's not yours at 10 p.m.? When you've rung the doorbell and thought someone was breaking in, 10 p.m. at night. By Monday afternoon, Andrew Lester's home, where the shooting happened, and it was a mob of angry, threatening people were out in the street of the home of an 84-year-old who lives alone, had been vandalized. Black spray paint on the side of the house showed a heart with 16 in the middle. Eggs splattered the front windows and the door. That's civilized justice. Nobody came to protect Andrew Lester when this was happening, to protect his home when this was happening. Benjamin Crump, who has represented families in several high-profile cases of black people being shot, including those of Trayvon Martin, where he lied relentlessly about the facts of the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Michael Brown, where Benjamin Crump lied relentlessly about the facts of Michael Brown, including putting before the media someone he presented as a medical examiner who was not, to testify that Brown's wounds were consistent with someone surrendering. Patently false statements. Ahmaud Arbery, blah. Breonna Taylor, who was being used as a shield by her drug-dealing boyfriend who was firing bullets back at the police who were serving a warrant on the home when she got struck by incoming fire from those police officers defending themselves against the boyfriends firing of rounds at them. And George Floyd questioned why the shooter wasn't arrested and charged immediately. Well, he actually was arrested immediately. He was arrested immediately. They didn't charge him because there's evidence here consistent with lawful defense of dwelling. It's not clear that a crime has been committed. I would argue that it's not more probable than not that a crime has been committed, which would be an absence of the probable cause necessary for charging. Of course, we don't have a real probable cause threshold in American law anymore. So if a prosecutor on their whim wants to charge you, they do. They just only put in the probable cause statement the half of the facts that are consistent with guilt. Interesting that the probable cause statement has not also been released. I wonder why that would be. Last news article. Neighbor who helped Ralph Yarl speaks out. I thought he was dead. James Lynch, 42, told NBC News he had just gotten out of the shower Thursday night when he heard gunfire. So he went to his kitchen window and noticed a boy banging on someone's door. Okay, so this banging on the door may be a misinterpretation on my part. I've been describing it as Ralph Yarl banging on Lester's door. Perhaps this was late enough in the proceedings that Jarl was already banging on other people's door. After Jarl was shot, he fled Lester's property, went to several other homes to try to get attention from other homeowners who either weren't home or didn't want to answer their door at 10 p.m. at night because it's dangerous. So that may be the door banging here. Fair enough. Let's see if I have anything else. Andrew Lester, 84, the white man who allegedly shot Jarl in what the Clay County Prosecutor's Office said was a crime that had a racial component. There's more of the racial component, more fuel for the racial arson, even though there's none of that in the probable cause statement. There's no hate crime charged here. There's no evidence of racial animus, malice, hate on the part of Andrew Lester, who was charged Monday with first-degree assault and armed criminal action. It also was revealed that there were signs warning against solicitors and trespassers at the residence. So Ralph Jarl was there unlawfully on the property. He was there without license. He had notice. He was not supposed to be on the property. And of course, Andrew Lester would know that whoever was banging on his door, whoever was working the storm handle, would know that they walked past no trespassing signs. Okay, and I wanted to share, there are a couple snippets from the probable cause statement that I guess were leaked to somebody, but I found them on Twitter. So let me open those up. I think I saved them here. Let's see. I'm pretty sure I saved them. Yeah, so here's one. It's going to be hard to read. I don't know why this is the only way we're seeing this. I don't know who Matt Flinner is. I presume he's a journalist. And they have this little, looks like it was taken with a smartphone photo of part of the probable cause. So anytime you're not seeing the whole thing, of course, we're missing context, right? Context, full context is being denied to us. But let's see what they're showing us. Lester stated he picked up his gun, a .32 Smith & Wesson 1888 revolver, before responding to answer the door. He stated the front door of his residence consisted of an interior main door and an exterior glass storm door, both of which were locked. Prudent. Lester stated he opened the interior door and saw a black male approximately 6 feet tall pulling on the exterior storm door handle. Are those facts consistent with an apparent attempt to unlawfully enter a dwelling? He stated he believes someone was attempting to break into the house. So we know his subjective state of mind. Was it objectively reasonable under these circumstances? Can the state reasonably disprove that beyond any reasonable belief? Any reasonable doubt? He stated he believes someone was attempting to break into the house and shot twice within a few seconds of opening the door. Lester stated the male ran away, and he immediately used his home phone to call 911. Isn't that what he's supposed to do? Compliant with the law and authorities? That seemed like the conduct of someone who shot someone over a doorbell ring. Lester stated he observed a car in the driveway he believed to be the male's vehicle, but did not see anyone else in or around the vehicle. Lester stated he had never seen the male before. He stated no words were exchanged during the incident, and the male had not said anything prior to pulling on the door handle. Lester stated it was the last thing he wanted to do, but he was scared to death due to the male's size and Lester's age, 84, and inability to defend himself. All of that, folks, all of those characteristics of the defender are taken into consideration when we're evaluating the reasonableness of his conduct. A large, strong, healthy, fit, muscular homeowner in his 30s would have a different self-defense narrative than does an 84-year-old, a frail 84-year-old living home alone, facing a large male pulling on his storm door in an apparent attempt to gain entry into the home, unlawful entry into the home. A stranger at 10 p.m. at night who walked past no trespassing signs to get to that point. Lester believed he was protecting himself from a physical confrontation and could not take the chance of the male coming in. Lester was visibly upset and repeatedly expressed concern for the victim. This is all evidence, folks, all of it, that's consistent with Andrew Lester having a reasonable perception that he was permissibly, under Missouri law, using deadly defensive force to prevent someone attempting to gain unlawful entry into his dwelling. And this is what the prosecutor has charged this 84-year-old with: a life felony. With these facts and evidence. Okay, so I think that's most of what I have to share at the moment. And by the way, I don't know what happened here. I wasn't there. I don't have any absolute knowledge of the facts. But I see enough facts that are inconsistent with the representation of Andrew Lester as some kind of racially motivated killer, attempted killer of a 16-year-old high school band student, that the propaganda campaign is contemptible. This is nothing but poisoning of the population against any attempt by Andrew Lester to get anything resembling justice, because he's entitled to justice too. Getting anything like an unbiased, impartial, fair jury that were promised under the Constitution, when a high-profile persona on Twitter can make this tweet saying that Andrew Lester shot a young black kid for no offense other than the ringing of a doorbell, and within a day of the shooting, 4.2 million people have been exposed to this contextless propaganda. We don't have a justice system. It's just a railroading. By the time this goes to trial in what, 6 months, nine months, a year? Just like Benjamin Crump did with George Zimmerman, he had 18 months, 13 months to propagandize George Zimmerman as a white Hispanic who killed Trayvon Martin out of racial animus for the crime of Trayvon Martin having iced tea and Skittles. It's a miracle that Zimmerman was acquitted, even though there was literally zero evidence inconsistent with self-defense in that case. Remember all the propaganda about the Kyle Rittenhouse case? All over Twitter, thousands, millions of people believed that Kyle Rittenhouse had shot 3 black people. They believed he crossed state lines with a rifle. All the other nonsense. How is anybody supposed to get a fair trial when Benjamin Crump is out there committing repeated acts of racial arson, and the media is more than happy to propagate it? It's just contemptible. Now, I certainly hope, I mean, let's be realistic. What are the prospects Andrew Lester, at 84 years old, is going to make at the trial? But I certainly hope that if he does, he has competent legal counsel that can make a reasonable effort, reasonable, evidence-based arguments in Andrew Lester's defense. Okay, so again, I'm going to turn to questions and such now. If you're on YouTube or Rumble, you'd like a question or comment addressed by me personally, I'm happy to do that. It needs to be a $5 minimum. YouTube super chat or a Rumble rant, $5 minimum, or if you're a Law Self-Defense member, and you could become a member right there at the bottom, lawselfdefense.com/join. Of course, your questions will all get answered for free. If you're a member, it's helpful to me if you could put the word question in all caps before your question so I can separate it from the chatter in the background. Let's see. Yes, hey, I'm looking at the Law Self-Defense members. All the usual suspects are there. Member Kyle asks, so you're saying that where I would have spent over $100 in super chats but didn't, I can still ask more? Yes, Kyle, as a Law Self-Defense member, you can ask an infinite number of questions in the Law Self-Defense member chat. No need to pay $5 a question. Let's see. Same Law Self-Defense member Kyle says, I watched the Zimmerman trial gavel to gavel. The incredibly aberrant judge and press was a blot on American society. Yep. Kyle says, comment, it may be too late, but you know this kid has a past that will come out like Martin Brown et al. I don't presume that, Kyle. I go where the evidence takes me. In the case of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, yeah, they had an extremely sketchy background. That, of course, the media hid at all costs. Um, and that's terrible. They don't hide anything. Well, they couldn't find anything about Zimmerman. They couldn't find anything bad about Officer Darren Wilson, so they didn't have much to say. So, but they hide the purported thefts, the violence of Trayvon Martin, the strong-armed robbery of Michael Brown. The media hides all this. They'll mention it once where they mention the propaganda 10,000 times. It's like putting a drop of truth into the ocean and claiming, well, we told the truth. So I don't have any reason to believe that Ralph Yarl is anything but a very nice high school student, plays in the band, went to this house with the best of intentions. But it doesn't matter legally, because the relevant legal question is, what was Andrew Lester's reasonable perception of the circumstances? It doesn't matter what Ralph Yarl was actually attempting to do. Law self-defense member says, I have questions from a forensic point of view. Was the handle for the storm door dusted for prints to confirm that the 16-year-old was trying to enter the home? Was there other physical damage to the storm door consistent with an attempt to enter? I don't know. I don't believe Andrew Lester is saying, I mean, what kind of physical damage would be to the door? If he kicked it, the glass would be broken, presumably. That's not the case. The damage to the glass is from the gunshots inside the house. Presumably, it would just be the manhandling of the door handle. By the way, is it possible Andrew Yarl grabbed the door handle, was pulling on a storm door because he perceived the doorbell rings were not working? Maybe he thought the doorbell was broken inside the house and he wanted to knock on the door in a perfectly lawful fashion, but for trespassing. Yeah, that's possible. Does that mean that his attempts to open a storm door could not have been reasonably perceived by Andrew Lester as an attempt to force unlawful entry into the dwelling? Both those things can be true, folks. Andrew Yarl can have had the best of intentions, no unlawful intent other than the trespassing. And Andrew Lester could still have reasonably perceived him as someone who was attempting an unlawful entry into his dwelling. And that second question is what controls whether Andrew Lester was justified in the use of deadly force. What controls is not Andrew Yarl's mental state or intent. Yeah, Tax Pro Pam says, if Yarl rang the doorbell, why bang on the door so loudly the neighbors hear? I might have been mistaken about that. I had interpreted the neighbor telling media about hearing banging on the door as banging on Lester's door. But it's possible that by the time the neighbor was hearing the door banging, Yarl had already moved from Lester's home and was banging on the doors of other homes to try to get aid from somebody. But this is what happens when we don't get a full rendition of the evidence. It becomes subject to misinterpretation. We only get bits and pieces from the media, contextless, misdescribed. Yes, the wooden entry door on the inside of the passageway was opened by Andrew Lester. Let's see. Kyle, law self-defense Kyle says, and I don't have any evidence to support this, but I'll defer to Kyle in his comment. So take it for what it's worth, folks. I just don't have any context here or foundation. But Kyle says, the cops told Lester that if it had been them, they would have shot Yarl, and that he had the right to do that. They told him he should be grateful. Sorry, Carl. I don't know if this is referencing Kyle or not. Oh, you're talking about someone who tried to break into your own home. Okay, I get it. Not a reference to the Lester shooting. Let's see. Well, I've got a ton of people calling me on my phone, I guess because they want to chat about this case. Miles Dog asks, question, after an incident, how quickly do you interact with the police or the DA? Well, I mean, interact, you're going to interact with the police as soon as they show up. As soon as you call 911, you're interacting with the police. If you mean give a statement, that depends on circumstances. You shouldn't give any detailed statement until you have a lawyer present, for sure, and maybe not even then. At that point, frankly, I would be having my lawyer make any statements rather than me do it, because my lawyer statements can't be used against me in court. Chris, law self-defense member Chris asks, how does the second shot factor into the charging decision? Well, again, I'm hearing things that sound like lies to me, to try to accentuate the propaganda, the purported malice that doesn't appear to actually exist here. But the propagandists are saying that Lester shot Jarl once when Jarl was upright through the door, and then a second time after Jarl was laying on the ground. Other than these blanket propagandistic statements, I've seen no evidence-based claims that Lester shot Jarl while he was on the ground. Certainly, we've not seen that from the bits and pieces of the probable cause statement that have been exposed. Now, if he did shoot Jarl on the ground, that would be pretty important. It would be hard to justify that shot. It would be harder, for sure. But I don't have any reason to believe that's true, and not just the same kind of lies that Benjamin Crump told about Trayvon Martin, told about Michael Brown. I mean, they lie about all this stuff. So you can't trust. Everything needs to be based on evidence, folks. Where's the corroboration? I wouldn't take anything Benjamin Crump said and give it any credibility at all, absent corroboration. Law self-defense member Dan says, that's why I won't shoot anyone through the door. Once they kick the door down, there's no question they force the way in. Sure. I mean, here, he didn't shoot through a wooden door. It was a glass door. He could see what he believed to be an unlawful intruder attempting to get in. Would an option have been not to open the door? Of course. But you're allowed to open your door if someone's knocking or ringing the bell. You're allowed to do that with a gun in your hand. So that's a tactical consideration. It doesn't undermine Lester's legal defense. Okay, and that's all the member questions. So let's take a look now at, see if there's any super chats. YouTube super chats must be $5, folks, and then I'll go to the Rumble rants. Just a couple. On YouTube, Ping King 554, $5 super chat. If this teen was white and the shooter was black, this wouldn't have made the news. Well, almost certainly, because Benjamin Crump and Lee Merritt would not have been involved, and the massive propaganda machine they have behind them. And a message here from Grant Brown. Grant, if you have something you'd like me to discuss, just email support@lawselfdefense.com. Bring to Andrew's attention in the subject line, and let me know how we can communicate other than super chats. And let's see if there's any Rumble rants. And there aren't. All right, folks. So that is what I have for all of you today. Please keep in mind, if you'd be interested in a law school education, law school level education, without the unbelievable cost and time of law school and without the political toxicity of today's law schools, then you might want to consider taking a look at our very own American law courses, where we teach first-year law school level courses to the general public. This summer semester is our first constitutional law class. You can learn more about all our courses at AmericanLawCourses.com. And with that, folks, remember, if you carry a gun for self-protection, so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill. Don't forget, you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law, so you're hard to convict. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branker for Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.